anything like me, you may well be a fan of Dennis on Hooked on Wood and be familiar with his concept for a silent box to use with the Record Power CamVac. He's got a 3-motor version. Mine is a dual motor 2 kilowatt version, the 55 litre. I've made a couple of videos on both that, automating that, putting it in my corner cabinet in the workshop behind me, and also using it in conjunction with the CamVac Defender 55 litre Interceptor dust separator, which I've put in and plumbed in through some hard ducting inside my cabinetry, and 3D printed a female bayonet connector to use with all of that. Today I'm finishing off the project to hide away the CamVac, and part of that is dealing with the heat that's generated by the 2 motors. So 2 kilowatt motors, 2 1 kilowatt motors running for any period of time in an enclosed space, particularly with some sound isolation foam in the cabinet, is going to generate heat. And one of the benefits of the CamVac design is that there's the ability to duct the exhaust from the motors away from the cabinet. And so I've done that through 63mm or 2.5 inch ducting hose, flexible hose, up through the cabinet into the top section. And I've got an unusual space up there where I'm creating a custom version of Dennis's Silent Box. So it has the 2 HEPA filters. I will be creating a front panel for this, and also probably use my laser to cut out an acrylic front end, just like in Dennis's plans, which I bought and very good, but I'm not following them to his dimensions or his overall shape and design. And what I've done for the rear of the Silent Box, if I call it that, is to 3D print in PETG some connectors, panel connectors. So this will allow me to attach the 63mm 2.5 inch hose onto this connector unit. This piece going through the panel, and on the other side I've 3D printed these little flap gates which use gravity just to fall down. So you may well also be aware that if you're only using one of the CamVac motors, there is a tendency for air to be sucked back in through the exhaust from the second motor that's not in use. So with this gravity operated flap, that should close off the unused duct and return route to the CamVac. So that goes on the inside. So we've got essentially got a panel in between here, the hose being connected on here, and here we've got, when it's operating, this flap will be elevated, and when it's not operating it'll be down, and any suction will just naturally close that, or at least that's the plan. We'll see how it works. So the first step in that plan is to use this Bosch Pro hole saw. It's a 64mm diameter one, to cut some holes in the back of the Silent Box panel that I've attached. So there's a 12mm half inch approximately, but 12mm ply, birch ply panel here. I've marked the location for 2 64mm holes, which will accept these 63mm connectors, panel mount, and mounted with 4 screws. So there we have, offering it up, 2 63mm ducting hose connectors externally mounted onto the panel, and I'll get around to attaching these flaps on the inside. Again, 4 screws offset from the locations of the external screws so they don't interfere with each other, and we'll see how that works. So you'll recognise these filters. I believe they're Karcher HEPA filters. They'll be mounted using some threaded rod and a wing nut on this end from a laser cut piece of acrylic frame that will be at the front with some openings for the air to come out and exhaust, yet sufficient to support the threaded rod to attach this firmly to the front of the unit. And inside the silent box, I've just loosely fitted a plywood baffle with some foam, noise insulation foam glued to that. And if I show you the interior of the box, it's really just some double-sided tape that's been used to stick these sections of acoustic foam in place, with this baffle coming up against it, and then the 2 HEPA filters that will be the exhaust route for the air to escape from the system. So it'll actually end up being a bit of a heater in the workshop, and rather than exhausting to the exterior and taking all of the warm air out of the workshop and into the outside atmosphere, at least this way, during winter at least, which is probably more of the year, it feels like winter more of the year here in the UK than it does summer, I'm not so worried about venting air-conditioned air out into the hot summer air atmosphere. It's usually a case of trying to keep the heat inside the workshop, and so this should do that quite effectively. So at this point, I'm going to align the connectors on the outside. Which will marry up with these flaps inside. And it looks like I'm going to have to cut back some of this foam so that they can actually do the intended job of flap up when there's exhaust coming in through the duct, and flap down when there's no exhaust coming through and there's the tendency for air to be sucked back in through the unused duct. Okay, so I'm going to use this center finding drill bit to pre-drill screw holes for each of these connectors. The same with this one. I'm a fan of these Spax Torx screws. These are 3.5 by 16s. There we have it, 2.5 inch or 63mm ducting connectors for the exhaust. So Exhaust from each CamVac motor will come in here, enter the silent box through the back panel, and then on the inside it should be tricky now that I've put those connectors on. I need to align the inside flaps, so I'm going to cut back this foam initially to make some space for that, and I'll be back with you in a moment. So here you have it. Now it's a case of drilling a number of holes for the screws to attach each of these panels in place. If I put the other flap in, you can see they quite nicely line up with the inlets, and gravity will pull those down when they're not in use and there's not air coming into the silent box. Well, it has to be said, there was no good angle I could find putting my arm and a drill inside this small space to be able to show you what we was doing, but needless to say, 4 holes per flap and connector faceplate were put in. I'll put these 3D models on my MakerWorld page so you can download them and print them if you're interested in this sort of approach. Dennis from HookedOnWood has a much more elegant kind of flap system, but it works on the same principle, or I've copied the same principle that he used of gravity operated flap that closes on its own when the duct that it's attached to isn't exhausting gas into air into the silent box. So these will ordinarily be sitting down closed like that. And again, on the other side, then we have the two 63 millimeter 2.5 inch ducting connectors, which I will route up through the back of my built-in cabinets in the corner of my workshop. And there we have the front panel, into which I'll cut 2 openings for the HEPA filters and cover those over with an acrylic mount. Well, the next step in the process is laser cutting plywood template that I'll use as a router guide to cut out the holes in front of each of the HEPA filters in the front panel of the silent box. There we have it, router template. This is the Trotec Ruby software for the Speedy 100 that I have, and I've simply drawn 2 160mm diameter circles, coloured them red, and red is the colour that's being used for cut. I've chosen a plywood for the template, and under the material details set the power to 100%, speed to 0.5%, frequency at 1000 hertz, so 1 kilohertz, and I've just stepped this up to 10 passes with a power correction of 10, and so I'll use that to mark the MDF front panel as well, and I've already queued that up to push to the laser, and so here it is ready to run. So I'll just give this a run to cut into the front panel of the Silent Box. I'll use the router template to actually cut through the material and give it a nice finished edge, but this will mark the positioning. You can see I've covered the surface of the painted MDF with some transfer paper. That'll at least prevent any of the scorching and soot carbon deposits from getting on the paint and having to clean that. I can simply remove the transfer paper and it will come away with it. So the next step is to cut the filter holder to go on the front panel of the Silent Box, and I'm going to do that by cutting 3mm thick black acrylic using the Trotec Speedy 100, and I've got it set up and queued ready to run in the Ruby software that comes with Trotec. Based on the quick test that I did off camera, I found that 4 passes at 75% power and 0.6% speed was sufficient to cut through the 3mm acrylic with a nice edge finish. Well, it's made a pretty nice job of cutting it out, and just will peel back the protective film. Didn't quite cut through the protective film there, but I'll use this to mount to the front panel of the Silent Box over the 2 large circles that were cut out. And in fact, what I did with the front panel itself was I thought, why just mark the positions for the filters, why not just cut the holes with the laser itself? So I did do that. I'll use this now to mount to the front panel, and then threaded rod through here and through here, with each of the HEPA filters aligned behind. Threaded rod goes through the back of the HEPA filter onto a wing nut, and there'll be a cap nut at the front here. So that'll hold it all together, and when the filters need changing, you can simply undo 4 knobs that I'll have located on these 4 corners here. And I'll use threaded inserts in the front panel so that it's easily mountable and dismountable. Okay, so I've cut the front panel for the Silent Box. I did that using the laser to mark out the circles, and then I actually cut through. I realized I needed to make the cutouts a larger diameter. I'd made them 160 millimeters, and really they needed to be 180 millimeters so that I could remove both filters from when attached to the front panel. So I increased, simple to do on the laser, I just increased the diameter of the cutouts, and then I used flush trim router, or flush trim bit, pattern bit, in this trim router to go around and enlarge each of the openings in the front panel, which is painted MDF. Subsequently, I realized that I was going to need to modify the acrylic front panel so that it had a slant here for to accommodate the ceiling of the workshop. So I tested that in ply. I got that to work, and now what I have done is cut the acrylic on the laser. Not wanting to waste any of the expensive acrylic, I tried it with the plywood first. You can hear, thank you Heathrow, I've got plenty of planes going over the house here. Now the plan is to use these threaded knobs. I think I've reused these from some piece of IKEA furniture. They might be a foot or something, but anyway, it's a handy knob to use, and I've got some threaded inserts that I'll insert in the MDF of the front panel. So that'll make the this acrylic filter holder a removable item. And just to point out how that's going to work, each of the 2 filters will be mounted on the acrylic using some threaded bar, a cap nut and a wing nut at this end. Right, first things first, I'll make the drill the holes for the threaded inserts. I've marked each of the 4 locations through the template holes. Double check those. I can drill all the way through. Okay, threaded inserts, here we go. Okay, that's pretty clean, but unfortunately I've managed to damage the paint on the surface of this one. but it's nothing that won't be hidden behind the black acrylic. It's a lovely, satisfying appearance. And it looks like I need to drill these holes out just slightly. Change of plan. I decided to use, instead of these reused ones from IKEA furniture, I've got these little ones that I got from AliExpress with a shorter thread, both M6, and I think they'll give a little bit more purchase. And yeah, there we go. So, threaded rod, cap nuts, and wing nuts to attach each of these to the back of the acrylic mount. So you can see air can pass through the filter and out through the front. Slight change of plan. I realized that the acrylic wasn't held down sufficiently well over the length of from bottom to top. So I decided to put in 2 additional fixings with threaded inserts, and ultimately I decided that some M6 washer head machine screws would probably be better than the thumb screw nuts or bolts, and looks a little bit cleaner. I'm not going to be removing the filters terribly often, so I can simply use a hex tool like this and take it on and off. So here I have the threaded rod, washer, cap nut that I'll secure with some thread lock. This will go through the front of the acrylic holder. It will go through the filter. Should be held to the front, and then cut this to length, and another washer and a wing nut to secure that at the back. Okay, so I've secured the acrylic filter holder to the front plate of the front face of the Silent Box. The satisfying piece now, removing the protective film from the acrylic. So I backed off the washer head screws slightly so I could get the protective film from underneath them. Now I'll just tighten those up again, snug them up. One of the problems of having such a small workshop is that I end up using the back patio as my extension workshop, and then for recording videos I'm subject to Heathrow air traffic and the frequency of the flights, which is not ideal. Anyway, so you can locate these 2 Karcher HEPA filters into the front panel slots as so. I've already secured these cap nuts with some blue thread lock, so it's not the permanent connection, but it's a strong one. Now I can fit these through the front hole, aiming for the hole in the back of the filter. One washer on each. I can thread on the wing nuts. So I've left the threaded rod a little bit long intentionally, past experience when I make it a bit too short for these sort of things, especially if I'm up a ladder up at the top of my cabinets trying to change the filters. It seemed like a much better idea that I have a bit extra rod to hang the filters off. Okay, I think finger tight is going to be sufficient for these. So there you have it, 2 HEPA filters applied to the acrylic front. This design is from Dennis at HookedOnWood. I've merely adapted it for the use in my silent box, which is a very different dimension and shape from his. I'll see how efficiently it works, but it should help reducing the noise of the CamVac in the workshop. It also has the additional benefit of extra HEPA filtering of the air that's coming out of the motors. So I've modified my CamVac so that instead of the dust sock and paper bag filters over each of the motor inlets, I've put Karcher HEPA filters in there, held in place with a 3D printed mount on each motor. So we've got a CamVac defender, dust separator, intercepting debris before it gets to the CamVac. Once any fine dust that does get to the CamVac is then further filtered by those HEPA filters before the motors. And then after the motors, when the exhaust is extracted and directed up to this silent box, before it comes out into the workshop, it goes through another HEPA filter stage. So the chance of 0.5 micron particulates making their way around the atmosphere in my workshop is greatly minimized, I hope. But I'll probably put an air filter in as well, but we'll see how this goes. Be interesting to see what 2 stages of HEPA filters on this actually does to the performance of the CamVac, but that remains to be seen. Okay, so the last step now is just to fix the HEPA filters and front panel in place. I drilled holes already to accept these SPAC screws. So the front panel is not intended to be removed with any sort of frequency. So really any maintenance of the filters will be performed by removing the acrylic filter holder panel using the 6 washer head machine screws. So there we have it. One Dennis HookedOnWood style silent box for the CamVac in a custom design to fit into underneath the ceiling of my workshop on top of the tall cabinets with 63mm 2.5-inch ducting coming up the back of the cabinets and into these 3D printed connectors printed in PETG, and as a reminder with the gravity flap on the inside, so any situation where there's a suction back into the CamVac through an unused one of the unused hoses should have that flap close and close off the duct. And in case you're wondering about the CamVac setup, I keep referring to it as in my corner cabinet. Indeed, that's how it is. It's hidden away in the corner of the workshop. I've taken these IKEA Method kitchen cabinets and used them as my storage furniture, and customize them to hold sustainers, etc., and pull out shelves. But this corner space was kind of dead space that I've used for clamp rack and various things, and it turned out to seem like a perfect spot to put the CamVac itself, and towards the back, and then in front of it I've got the Defender interceptor dust separator. And the CamVac is, each motor, the two motors are vented through these 63mm flexible hoses, which I've directed up the back of the cabinet, up to the silent box that you've just seen me finish putting together. So it just remains for me to connect the hoses, which are there right now and disconnected. I need to core some 64mm holes in the top of the cabinets, up the back and into the back of the silent box, and fingers crossed it really helps reduce the sound of the CamVac, and does a good job at secondary filtering, HEPA filtering of the exhaust. Okay, so let's take a look at the entire CamVac system. I've hidden it away in the corner cabinet. So we've got the CamVac in the rear, the Defender interceptor in front. I've got it ducting coming in and through the cabinets, and here is a 3D printed female bayonet port panel mount with a built-in blast gate. I've got another one here for my laser for fume, low volume, low pressure fume extraction. But this is set up to take the Record Power new bayonet connectors. So this is my 100mm dust extraction flexible hose. A bit too much of it here, but that will connect to the 120mm outlets on my Felder hammer tools. And I've automated the CamVac so that there's a Wi-Fi relay, a Shelly 1 PM, in conjunction with a soft start filter to start each of the motors. I've synchronized that with an Alexa skill so that I can voice activate both motors at once, or via the app I can do single motor and select which ones I want to use. So I just close the cabinet now, and then up here you can see this is the silent box, the HEPA Silent Box version that I've created, following on from Dennis's on HookedOnWood, his design, and it's just integrated into the way I've got my built-in cabinets in the workshop here. So Alexa, eat my dust. So we've got a really good vacuum here. I stupidly left the gate closed, last gate closed. Yeah, we've got a good suction there. And we've got it coming out of the HEPA Silent Box. So if I had a means of testing the decibels of noise before and after, well, it would have been great, but I'm taking Dennis's word for it that the silent box is effective. I can hear for myself that it's much quieter than without the extraction hose, and certainly the extraction hose plus the silent box is even more effective. I could isolate the CamVac and the Defender a little bit more using some sound isolating foam, but I think just because of heat build-up in there, even though the exhaust is being evacuated out of the cabinet through the silent box, I prefer not to do that for the moment. We'll see how it goes. And there is an open space at the bottom of the cabinet where air can come in, so it's not, if there is any issue with, I'm not creating a vacuum in there or anything, so if there's any leaks in any of the system. So that's it. Project finished.